Libra, there are moments in life that do not arrive with loud noise. No obvious event. No clear disruption. Yet they are powerful enough to make your heart pause for a single breath. You cannot explain exactly what has changed, only that something familiar suddenly feels unfamiliar. As if the room you sit in every day has quietly gained an invisible window you never noticed before. The wind still moves. Light still falls through the glass. But inside, you know something else is happening. A new current is moving through your life, silently, steadily, without asking for permission. You may have felt it on an ordinary morning. You woke up. Everything looked the same. But you did not feel the same. A small pause appeared inside you. Not anxiety, not sadness, just that subtle moment when intuition gently taps your shoulder and tells you it is time to look deeper. Libra is sensitive to balance by nature. So when something shifts, even slightly, you are the first to feel it. Even when no one has said a word, you may have tried to ignore that feeling, telling yourself you were overthinking, that everything was fine, that it was better not to make a big deal out of nothing. But the soul does not speak in logic. It speaks in signals, in the way your breath changes, in the way your eyes linger on a small detail, in the quiet tightening in your chest when someone smiles and it no longer feels warm. These signals are not here to scare you. They are here to wake you up. Libra often chooses peace, chooses harmony, chooses to believe in the good in others. And because of that, you became very skilled at silence. You learned how to tolerate uncertainty, how to accept half answers, how to adjust yourself so the surface stays calm. Until one day, that silence became heavier than words, not because something dramatic happened, but because too many things were no longer being called by their real name. This change is not here to break you. It arrives like a thin beam of light, slipping through a crack you never noticed. It is not harsh, not blinding, but it is strong enough to reveal corners you have avoided looking at for a long time. What was once covered by habit, by politeness, by the desire to keep balance, now begins to appear in your deepest awareness. And even if you cannot name it yet, your soul already knows there is no going back to the old state. What matters is this: you are not rushing, you are listening, you are observing. You are allowing yourself to feel without forcing conclusions. This is one of Libra's quiet strengths, maturity that comes from staying with emotion instead of running from it or reacting too quickly. In this stillness, you are learning to trust yourself again. To trust that what you feel has value, even while the outside world remains quiet. And within that silence, something important is happening. You begin to understand that truth does not always need to be shouted. Sometimes it only needs permission to exist. When you stop denying it, when you stop softening everything by making yourself smaller, what needs to be seen naturally moves toward the light. Not dramatically, but with a calm, human clarity. This feeling is like standing by a lake at dawn. At first, the water is unsettled. Reflections are distorted. But when you stand still long enough, when the wind settles, the image becomes clear. You do not need to stir the water. You only need to stay long enough, awake enough, honest enough with yourself. And then you see that not everything is as frightening as you once believed. Some truths may tighten your chest at first, but they carry a deep sense of relief with them. In this space, you enter a different state of being. One where you stop searching for answers outside and begin noticing what has been quietly unfolding within. Emotions once set aside. Questions long postponed. They no longer want to stay still. They move forward gently, without pressure, without urgency, simply inviting you to walk with them. And if you listen closely, you will realize that from this very quiet moment, a deeper journey is beginning to unfold. A journey where everything that once confused you slowly finds its true place. Naturally, fairly, and in a way that feels deeply aligned with who Libra truly is. And right there, as everything slowly begins to return to its rightful place, you realize something quietly profound. You have been walking this path for a very long time. You just never named it before. You called it patience. You called it compassion. You called it trying to understand others. But beneath all those beautiful words was a kind of silent endurance that only you truly knew. Time and again you adjusted yourself so things would not fall out of rhythm. You chose silence when you felt unheard. You chose a smile when something inside you gently sank. You told yourself that if you were a little softer, a little more patient, everything would eventually be fine. And for a long time, you lived that way, living by the belief that balance could be preserved through compromise. But there were very quiet evenings, when the outside world had finally settled, and you felt a low note echo somewhere in your chest. Not sharp, not dramatic, just enough to keep you from feeling fully at ease. That was intuition speaking, not to accuse anyone, not to confuse you, but to remind you that there were things you were carrying for others, empty spaces you were trying to fill with your own understanding. You began replaying small moments in your mind, wondering why they made you uncomfortable. A glance that did not quite meet yours. A sentence that sounded normal, but lacked warmth. A moment when you needed clarity, and received careful avoidance instead. You let these things pass, because you did not want to make a big deal. You did not want to disrupt the harmony you had worked so hard to build. But your body remembered, your heart remembered, and your intuition never forgot. There were times you thought maybe you were too sensitive, that maybe you were overthinking, that maybe you expected too much. You questioned yourself more than you questioned the situation, and that created a very specific kind of exhaustion. The exhaustion of always holding balance for everyone else, while your own balance grew thinner, more fragile, day by day. And yet, this is what matters. You never lost the ability to listen inward, even when you tried to ignore it, even when you tried to rationalize it away. There was always a part of you quietly watching, quietly recording. It connected the details, the emotions. Every moment your chest tightened without a clear explanation. And eventually, you no longer needed proof, because the truth began to rise through feeling alone, clearer than any explanation could ever be. You are not weak for having endured for so long. In fact, only those with hearts deep enough and compassionate enough can walk that road without becoming hardened. You learned how to stay, how to give others time, how to believe things could improve. But now, as a gentle awareness spreads through you, you begin to understand something essential. True harmony does not come from one person carrying everything. It comes from honesty on both sides. A new kind of gentleness is forming within you. Not the kind that sacrifices itself, but the kind that protects its own boundaries. You are still Libra. You still love balance. You still value beauty and harmony. The difference is this. You are no longer turning away from your own feelings. You are allowing what was once compressed to breathe, to exist, to be heard. And when you do, something unexpected happens. Not fear, but relief. As if you have finally set down a scale you have been trying to balance alone for far too long. In that relief, you begin to see more clearly what is real and what only existed because you stayed silent. There is no rush, no need to decide everything at once. Just continue walking with this feeling, because it is guiding you, quietly and steadily, toward the kind of fairness you have always deserved. And as you continue walking with that feeling, you begin to notice something unexpected. Nothing around you explodes the way you once feared. There is no confrontation, no dramatic confession, no overwhelming moment like the ones people talk about in stories. The truth arrives so gently that at first, you almost miss it. You only catch it because you have learned to listen to yourself a little more deeply. It shows up in the smallest details. An eye that cannot quite meet yours when you ask a simple question. A silence that lingers longer than it needs to. An answer that sounds reasonable, but lacks the life you instinctively look for. No one says anything outright wrong, but no one says anything fully true either. And in those small gaps, the truth begins to find its way into the light. You do not need to search for it. You do not need to interrogate anyone. You certainly do not need to prove that you were right. The pieces you once tried to force together with logic now slide into place on their own. What once felt scattered, what once made you doubt yourself, suddenly connects into a complete picture. Not the picture you hoped for, but an honest one. There is a very quiet moment when you realize you have seen this before. You just were not ready to name it yet. You allowed uncertainty to exist for too long because you believed kindness and patience could soften everything. But some things no longer need softening. They need to end. So you can finally take a deep breath without holding together something that has been exhausting you. This truth does not arrive to wound you further. It comes with a calm clarity, cool and unmistakable, like still water after the last wind has passed. You look back at what happened and understand that a cycle has been running for too long. A cycle of concealment, of subtle control, of half-spoken words that required you to constantly adjust yourself just to keep things steady. That cycle does not collapse because you do something dramatic. It collapses because your silence no longer feeds it. A sense of cleansing begins to move through you. Not loud, not painful in the way you once imagined. Just a natural release. Questions no longer demand answers. Doubts no longer need explanations. You stop trying to understand why others behaved the way they did. You only need to understand that it no longer fits who you are now. And in that release, you feel lighter, as if an invisible cloak you have been wearing for far too long has finally been lifted. You are not angry. You are not triumphant, just deeply calm. A calm that comes from no longer betraying your own inner knowing. You begin to see the line between what is real and what only existed because you stayed silent. There is no need to analyze, no need to compare. Your body responds before your thoughts do. Your chest no longer tightens when something feels wrong. Instead, it gently steps back, instinctively protecting itself. This is not coldness. This is self-respect returning to its rightful place. And as the old cycle closes this way, you do not feel loss. You feel a slight emptiness. But it is the kind of emptiness that allows light to enter. Some spaces are not meant to be filled quickly. They exist so you can finally see how much you were carrying that never truly belonged to you. In this quiet pause, you begin to understand that real fairness does not need to be fought for. It arrives when you are honest enough to stop staying where the truth can only exist as a whisper. And when you stay long enough inside that quiet space, a very different realization begins to take shape. You start to see that what exhausted you the most was not what actually happened, but the constant question you kept turning inward. Am I wrong? Did I misunderstand? Am I the problem here? You became used to aiming doubt at yourself, used to adjusting your emotions so everything could look fine on the surface, even while inside you were drifting away from your natural center. There were days when you felt drained without knowing why, as if your energy was being taken slowly, evenly, until one day you were too tired to even name what was happening. You once believed that this was the cost of being refined, the cost of understanding, the cost of always choosing harmony. But as new light finally reaches you, you begin to see what you traded away. Not just emotion, but confidence, inner safety, trust in your own worth. When you are always the one who steps back, always the one who listens, always the one holding balance for everyone else, it becomes easy to forget that you, too, belong at the center of the scale. There may have been moments when you looked at your life and felt that things were no longer flowing smoothly. Decisions felt heavier. Choices that once seemed clear now came with hesitation. Even in the most practical areas of life, you no longer felt steady. Not because you became weaker, but because you stood for too long in a place that was never meant to be yours. When inner balance shifts, the outside world quietly mirrors it. And then, when the truth is no longer covered, something important happens. You do not feel the loss you once feared. Instead, it feels like retrieving a part of yourself you thought had been lost somewhere along the way. A feeling that is familiar, old, and long untouched. It is the feeling of standing upright in your own energy. Without asking permission, without explaining, without shrinking yourself so others can feel comfortable. You begin to see that your value never disappeared. It was simply obscured while you worked to keep everything peaceful. As the haze clears, You recognize yourself again. The same refinement, the same fairness, the same depth. The difference is this: you no longer place your worth behind someone else's emotions. You allow clarity to come first. You allow your inner limits to be honored. And that creates a stability that feels new and deeply real. Your relationship with practical life begins to shift. You no longer act from scarcity or insecurity. You begin choosing from a place of light, from a place where you feel safe within yourself. Energy starts to return to its natural rhythm. What once felt stuck begins to move again. Not because you are pushing harder, but because you are no longer pulling yourself out of alignment. You also come to understand something essential. Balance does not mean keeping everything the same. True balance means allowing what no longer fits to leave, so what truly belongs can arrive. In this movement, you lose nothing of value. You are simply returning what was never yours to carry, to make room for what deserves to stay. A deep sense of calm begins to spread. Not the calm of avoidance, but the calm that comes when you finally stand on your own side. There is no rush to rebuild everything. All that is asked is that you remain here, listening, choosing carefully, respecting yourself a little more each day. From this place forward, what enters your life will no longer be built on endurance, but on genuine compatibility. And in a moment that feels completely ordinary, when you take a full breath and realize you are no longer bracing yourself, something lasting begins to form. Quiet, unimpressive from the outside, but unmistakably right. You have lost nothing. You are simply returning to yourself, to your real value, to the fairness you have always carried inside. And when you stand firmly there, doors to healthier connections, new experiences, and steadier beginnings open on their own, like a gentle reply from life itself to a Libra who has finally learned not to abandon themselves anymore. And then, there is a very special moment that happens inside you. No one witnesses it. There is no ceremony, no announcement spoken out loud. You simply realize something has truly ended. Not in the painful way you once imagined, but in a quiet, ripened way. Like a leaf letting go of the branch when the season is right. You stop holding on. You no longer need to explain. You just know you cannot keep carrying what is no longer alive in truth. It may have been a relationship that once mattered deeply. It may have been an image of someone, or even an image of yourself, that you protected for a long time. Or it may have been an old belief that if you were gentle enough, understanding enough, selfless enough, everything would work out. But now, as you look back with clearer eyes, you see that those things were built on a foundation that was never fully solid. Not because someone meant to break it, but because truth was never truly placed there from the beginning. This moment does not arrive with loud crying. It feels more like the quiet dignity of a very deep goodbye. You allow yourself to stop, to look directly at what has passed. Without blame, without denial, you see your efforts clearly. You see the moments when you made yourself smaller just to keep something alive. And in that honest, balanced recognition, you understand you did the best you could with the awareness you had at the time. A very light sadness moves through you, but it does not pull you down. It is like a thin morning mist, enough to be felt, not enough to block your vision. You are not sad because you lost something. You are sad because you stayed too long in a space that could never fully hold the truth. And that sadness carries a deep respect for yourself. Because you were brave enough to stop deceiving yourself. You begin to see clearly now. This is not failure. It is a necessary rite of passage. When something no longer fits, allowing it to close is an act of maturity, not weakness. You are not burying the past. You are returning it to its rightful place. In memory, in lessons, in the journey that shaped who you are today. With this ending comes a very real sense of release. As if you have finally set down a weight you carried so long. You forgot you were allowed to let it go. There is no longer a need to keep trying to understand. No longer a need to wait for clarity from the outside. You give yourself that clarity by admitting something essential. Some things can only exist in silence. And when silence is no longer healthy, ending becomes the only doorway into new life. In this moment, The space around you feels wider, not because more has been added, but because less that does not belong to you remains. You breathe deeper, you move slower, and you begin to feel a very different kind of peace. A peace that no longer depends on whether someone stays or leaves. This peace comes from one place. You are no longer betraying your own inner knowing just to preserve an old image. You understand now that every chapter in life exists for a reason. This chapter taught you patience, compassion, how to love without harming others, and it has completed its role. Letting it end does not diminish what once existed. It honors it, by not stretching a story longer after truth has spoken. And as you stand in the final stillness of that closing, with nothing left to hold on to, and nothing left to prove, you sense a very new energy waiting ahead. It does not rush forward. It does not need a name yet, but it is close enough for you to know you are not stepping into emptiness. You are stepping out of an old cycle and into a space where everything will be built on a different foundation. A foundation of truth, of self-respect, and of a heart that has learned that letting go at the right time is also one of the deepest forms of love. And from that moment on, you realize you have changed in a way that is hard to name. Not by becoming closed off, not by turning cold, the way people often fear when they hear the word letting go. This change is softer, deeper, like water after the rain, clearer, reflecting the sky more honestly. You are still you, just a version of you that no longer tries to explain what never needed defending. A new clarity begins to shape the way you look at love. You no longer search for safety in vague promises or in familiar feelings held together by habit alone. You start to sense very clearly when a connection is no longer transparent, when silence stops being restful and becomes avoidance instead. Before, you may have softened those signals, telling yourself you should be more patient, more understanding. Now you simply listen, and you respect what you feel, without making it dramatic, without turning away in anger. You learn to set boundaries the Libra way, not sharp, not confrontational, but unmistakably clear. These boundaries are not meant to exclude. They exist to protect your inner space. You no longer fear that speaking your needs will hurt someone else. You understand now that truth spoken with respect is the foundation of any healthy connection. If a relationship cannot survive honesty, then it was never built on solid ground to begin with. Something beautiful happens when you stop staying silent just to preserve false peace. You begin to hear your own voice more clearly, not a voice that argues, not a voice that proves, but a voice that knows where it stands, what it needs, and what it deserves. That voice carries the calm of someone who has faced the truth and is no longer afraid of loss. You do not need to keep anyone close by shrinking yourself. You allow things to unfold naturally, trusting that what belongs to you will never require force. In love, you begin choosing clarity over familiarity. You are no longer drawn into connections that make you guess, question, or wait endlessly for consistency from someone else. You understand now that lasting love does not test you through confusion. It asks for presence, for honesty, for mutual respect. And when you stand firmly there, you stop attracting relationships built on uncertainty. Your energy shifts, and the world responds in quiet, subtle ways. There may be moments when you feel empty, not because you are alone, but because you were once used to filling space with effort. Now that you no longer do that, the emptiness appears as an invitation to rebuild slowly, from the ground up, on the foundation of honesty with yourself. That space is not frightening. It is like a room that has just been cleared. No furniture yet, but full of light and possibility. You begin to open your heart differently, not all the way, not completely closed, but open in the right places, to the right people, at the right time. You allow new connections to come closer without carrying the weight of the past. You no longer measure depth by how much you endure. You understand now that real love does not require the sacrifice of inner peace. It lifts you. It does not pull you into cycles of doubt. And within this quiet transformation, a new sense of safety takes root. Not because someone is beside you, but because you know you will no longer abandon yourself. You can love deeply, without losing direction. You can give freely, without draining yourself. You stand there, in a balance that feels real, alive, and grounded. And from that place, healthy beginnings find their way to you naturally. No need to name them, no need to rush them. Only the honesty to recognize them when they arrive. And within this new state of balance, you begin to notice a change so subtle, yet completely irreversible. You no longer need to think so hard to understand a situation. There is no need to analyze every word, every gesture, every silence. A knowing arrives before thought does. Light as breath, yet solid like the ground beneath your feet. You recognize what is real the moment it enters your space, and you sense what no longer resonates before it has time to leave a mark. You begin reading energy in a way that feels natural, not through suspicion, but through clarity. When someone speaks truth, your body relaxes. When someone hides, you do not feel confused or unsettled. You simply know. The feeling comes quickly, cleanly, without tension. It is like walking into a room and instantly knowing whether you want to stay, without needing a reason. In the past, you often forced yourself to ignore these signals. You believed you needed proof, confirmation, someone else to say it out loud. You worried that trusting your intuition would make you harsh or less compassionate. But now you understand this. Intuition is not judgment. It is a deep form of intelligence, shaped by everything you have lived through, by every time you sensed something was off and talked yourself into silence, by every moment you felt uneasy and chose to stay anyway. This awakening does not make you cold. It makes you kinder to yourself. You no longer argue internally when an unfamiliar feeling appears. You no longer ask if you are being too sensitive. You allow the feeling to exist as a signal worth respecting. You do not rush to act on it. And you do not dismiss it either. You simply acknowledge that it is there, and that it is trying to protect you. From this place, a new kind of confidence begins to grow. Quiet, unannounced, uninterested in proving anything. It is the confidence of someone who has walked through enough uncertainty to understand the value of clarity. You trust yourself now, not because you are always right, but because you know you will no longer betray your own inner knowing. Whether you choose to stay or choose to walk away, you understand that your decision comes from honesty within, not from the fear of disappointing someone else. You also notice something else. Falsehood no longer reaches you the way it once did, not because you have built walls, but because your energy no longer sustains what lacks truth. Connections built on performance, on polished words without substance, on prolonged ambiguity, they begin to fall away on their own. No conflict, no drama, just no point of meeting anymore. Most importantly, you no longer need anyone to validate your feelings. You do not require more evidence to trust what you see, what you sense, what you feel. This brings a profound sense of freedom. You stop waiting for others to clarify things for you. You stop over-explaining your choices. You move more lightly now, and yet, more steadily. This spiritual maturity does not come from closing yourself off. It comes from becoming honest. Honest with emotion, honest with limits, honest with what no longer fits. You no longer try to make everything logical by ignoring what you truly feel. You allow inner truth to lead, trusting it will guide you toward places that are safer, healthier, and more aligned. And within this quiet trust, you no longer feel alone on the path. It is as if there is a presence beside you. No words, just companionship. You begin walking more slowly, more deeply, paying closer attention to what is small, yet real. Your steps are no longer pulled forward by doubt. They are supported by a very human understanding that when you listen closely enough to yourself, the road ahead naturally reveals itself, clear, balanced, and fair in its own way. And when you look back at the entire path you have just walked, one thing becomes very clear. You did not lose anything important. You reclaimed something that had been set aside for far too long. This truth did not arrive to knock you down. It did not come to punish you. It did not come to reopen old wounds. It arrived quietly, with steady certainty, like a gentle hand resting on your shoulder, telling you it is time to stand in the place that has always been yours. You begin to understand that truth is not as cruel as people often fear. What hurts most is not truth itself, but living too long inside something that is not true. When the light finally reaches you, you no longer have to tense yourself to hold the balance for the entire world. You have the right to choose, the right to stay, or to leave, the right to say yes, or to say no, the right to honor your own feelings without asking permission from anyone. A quiet sense of dignity returns to you. Not loud, not performative, not needing recognition. It is the dignity of someone who dared to look straight at what was uncomfortable, who dared to let go of what no longer fit, who dared to believe they deserved clarity. You no longer trade your inner peace to keep a fragile connection alive. You no longer wear masks just to make others feel comfortable. What leaves your life now takes nothing of value with it. It simply gives you space back. Space to breathe. Space to feel. Space for what is truly meant for you to finally enter. You begin to see that stability does not need to be loud. It grows from simple things. A relationship that does not make you guess. A conversation that does not make you shrink. A presence that does not require you to be anyone other than yourself. You also realize there is no need to rush to fill the empty spaces. This space is not lack. It is readiness. Readiness for clearer connections. Readiness for values built on truth, not on the fear of loss. When you allow yourself to stay with that space, you send a clear message to the world. You have learned the most important lesson. You know what you are worthy of. There may be moments when memories return and your heart softens for a second. That is natural. But now, you do not go back to blame yourself. You look back with quiet gratitude. Because those experiences led you here. To a place where you no longer need to compromise with what hurts you. You have grown in the most Libra way possible. Not through confrontation, but through awareness and fairness. And as you move forward from here, you carry a gentle certainty with you. You know you will not be pulled into old cycles again. Not because you control everything, but because you learned to listen earlier and more deeply. You trust yourself enough to pause when needed. Enough to walk on when the time is right, and enough to say goodbye without carrying bitterness. In the end, what remains is not a story of loss. It is a story of return. A return to your real value. A return to inner balance. A return to a heart that knows how to love without harming itself. And in that return, there is nothing left to prove. Only life, lived slowly, clearly, so that what is true, lasting, and worthy can find its way to you. At the right time, in the right way, like a fair, gentle reply from life itself to a Libra who finally chose not to trade themselves away anymore.